Her working life as a soprano singer, and she's written novels, she's written poetry, and her recent book is The State of Dark, and it's described as a fictional memoir, and this is it here, and you can buy a copy from Francis and Ham at the back, and Judith might sign it perhaps later. So it's a remarkable book. It's reminded me, reading it, of some of Heinrich Böll's early novels, in the sense that the subject matter of the book is the effects of the aftermath and the generational aftermath of the effects of World War II. Heinrich Böll's novels, there are lots of them, but some of the early ones, the short ones, were about the effects of the war, or the aftermath of the war. Some of the characters suffered through the war, and Judith's book, in that sense, is a good match for this event, perhaps. Another thing we've been aware of in this weekend is trying to look back to that Heinrich Böll and his influence and his legacy, but also to look to the future and to invite contemporary writers in who are looking to the future as well from the past. So please give a warm welcome to Judith Mok.
Thank you so much to the Heinrich-Böll for having me. This is a wonderful place. It is an online film book that directs me towards the offices of what once used to be the Westervoort transit camp in Holland, a camp built in 1939 by the Dutch government to house the endless flow of Jewish immigrants before it decided to close the borders. In 1940, the Germans occupied Holland and took over the camp to facilitate the transportation of the tens of thousands of Dutch Jews. They would intermarry to German concentration camps. I have decided the time has come when I need to know what happened to my paternal grandparents and my aunt Sarah. There was never enough courage in our family to rip down the curtain completely and face some naked facts that remain: date, year, the number of the barracks, tray, count, to two-numbered, death. On this bright day, the Dublin mountains are lit up by a soft sunlight. All is quiet. I can't hide sweat behind my computer screen, basking in its warm blast, as I dial in the number of the officers still in place of the former Westervoort camp and hold the phone to my ear. I pretend to myself that I just have to ask a practical question about some family history. A very kind lady answers the phone. I explain who I am and what I am looking for. I wait for her to go through various computer files. Whoever stare patiently out the window. Yes, she says, in a calm voice. The other's death. Whether they were born or not, they didn't get a number and slipped through the mesh of the well-organized German administration. I talk, and the lady agrees with me. She has something to add, though. Would I like to get an email with a list of all the disappeared family members? I don't understand what she's saying. The landscape outside is blurry. My head is swimming. I stumble. All right. I'd hang up to open my email. When I sit reading, nailed to my chair, rows and rows of names appear on my screen. All these family members, babies, teenagers, aunts, uncles, cousins. My notebook is open and I start making a small mark on the blank page for each person that died. Sobibor, Auschwitz, Mauthausen, Tolwitz, Treblinka. I count 163. Checking and checking again. Through the unstoppable tears, I get up to wash my face and look up in the bathroom mirror only to see myself again. And again, ask myself, why? I sit down on my bed and unconsciously stroke my grandfather's Heimat Talit, the prayer shawl it should have been buried in. Instead, it had been smuggled through the wall by my father and is now covering the end of my bed. Only now do I realize that it might be time for me to speak where my parents stayed stumm in order to let their new post-war life take over. The silence they carried around with them was filled to the brim with dead voices. I read my father's extensive literary work and I listened to my mother's stories, but they passed on this terrible silence to me. Why speak? Why tell the tale so many times already? By the great writers or courageous survivors, I ask myself this, feeling completely flat and empty. It is because my parents' world was so extended healed that revealing them would have, without a doubt, killed them. Because everything they loved and stood for in their life and culture had been destroyed in order to reduce them to barbarians themselves. Because using their strength to try and convince us of the importance of an open, free, and deep understanding of life, they have pushed away what they missed. Also, because they and their families had brought so much to their country, a richness in culture and love that took just a few minutes to wipe out. The scratch marks of nails on the filthy wall of a Nazi gas chamber were supposed to be their legacy. Instead, I have to believe that they would have liked for me to write their testament.
Oh.
I first heard of the name Anna when I was 5 years, when I was fine for 6 years old in the house in the Germans. We were sitting in the living room on a quiet afternoon, and for some reason I remember that my mother was talking about varnishing the floorboards with a deep purple color. That the doorbell rang. My father answered the door and brought in a tall and somewhat weird-looking stranger. I had no idea who he was, but later it was told me that it was a man called Otto Prank, who had come all the way from Switzerland to visit us. He went with my father to his study. Sometime later they emerged, and my father was crying. I had never seen him cry before, so it made a strong and confusing impression on me. Mr. Frank had come to visit my father to give him some letters and papers. They related to my father's sister, my Aunt Sarah. I knew that he had been murdered in a German concentration camp, but my parents rarely talked about these matters, or other, as they thought my sister and I were too young to fully understand the tragedies that had taken place in our family. From the adults' conversation, I learned that my Aunt Sarah had known Mr. Frank's daughter, Anna, in the concentration camp of Auschwitz, before Anna was moved to Bergen-Belsen, where she would die months later. Sire was already dead soon after Anna left Auschwitz. That's how this point came into my life. It was years later that I read her diary. It was written in my native language, Dutch. But I knew she had been born in Germany and had come to Holland with her family, fleeing the Nazi regime. Like many of the Dutch writers and intellectuals of his generation, my father spoke fluent and correct German. Whenever I ventured a sloppy sentence or made a grammatical mistake in the language he worshipped, a tortured frown would appear on his large brow. How painful it must have been that the pit language of his family as murderers was the same as the one he had learned to admire and love as an innocent Dutch teenager. We never spoke about it. I read the beautiful never-bound German books by Heine, Goethe, Schiller, and many others in our little black and gold painted library. I loved those books with their Gothic script, and I loved the smile on my father's face when he discovered our shared joy in the German language. When I came to read Anne Frank's diary, I already understood why she had decided to write in Dutch, the language of the country where she was given refuge and grew up, and where eventually, as the world knows, she would go back to hiding in an annex behind a house on the Pieterhoofd. Then they were betrayed and taken off to Westerbork, Charles at Camp, like my aunts and uncles, my grandparents, my cousins, all the members of my family, ranging from toddlers to pensioners. After spending a short period there, they were loaded onto the trains heading east to the extermination camps. None of them ever came back. After the war, everyone, including my parents, struggled to get back to life as normal, as if that was possible. Only in his very old age did my father open up about those closest to him, who had betrayed or hadn't been betrayed by their fellow citizens and then murdered in the camps, just like Anne Frank. There had been a lot of research and speculation about the identity of her betrayer, but the answers are there are few secrets. There was so much unspoken, but everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew who had betrayed whom. Already as children we understood that there were shops you didn't set foot in, restaurants you didn't eat in, families you avoided, people you didn't speak to. It was rarely talked about directly, but somehow we knew it. Only once as a child did I see my father's anger. We were driving past a busy restaurant, one of the best known in Amsterdam, the owner's name in hat-fold letters on the window, and time stood still. I knew somehow that these were the people who told the police about my aunt Sarah's hiding place. These people were evidently still doing well in Amsterdam. The traffic is dense, and we sit in the car looking at that restaurant. We see eager people in front of their big plates of food. We are all quiet, waiting for the traffic lights to change, the rain to stop, the car to move on. My father's rage comes out of nowhere. He shakes a white-knuckled fist at the overlit restaurant and shouts through the open car window. It follows. Yes. Vienna. That night, the train for Vienna leaves at 11 o'clock. From Amstel's interstate, we arrived early to Madrid in the waiting room. It still has all the features of when it was first designed and built. This was the place where a close friend of my mother's would often meet up with her to encourage her to develop her talents as an actress. The place where he gave her presents of books, the first edition of Holland and float pilot, for example, that he thought would inspire her. I had been living in Paris for the previous 2 years, and this was my fifth visit to the capital of what once was the great Austro-Hungarian Empire, a city where I was coming to study with one of the great stars of the fresco singing world, whom I had already worked with in Paris. Though I was used to our goodbyes on the platform, I always found it hard to tear myself away from my parents' words, from their well-meant recommendations. When we were in our late teens, my parents encouraged us to go and explore parts of Europe that they considered safe. We traveled and had the use of the languages we had learned at home, so not to feel helpless or misunderstood abroad. Where I enjoyed interpreting for the friends who came with us, I was so startled to feel this growing sense of rootlessness. My friends talked about their homes and their countries as places where they were anchored. I was not familiar with that feeling, with those feelings. So I felt secure and comfortable in my young independence. An equally strong feeling of melancholy started to settle in me. My parents waving hands and fading smiles, they're growing older and smaller on the platform at me settled in my train seat to go and live in this another language. It soon became a passion of my young life. I knew that those two beacons on the platform would inevitably become a memory. They were well into middle age when I was born, and death would catch up with them, leading me to build on new beacons in my wilderness life. I was 22 when I arrived in Vienna. On the first morning, for a couple of nights, I was housed in a home frequently before I was to move in with a singer friend. The frills and dark colors of a conservative Austrian home were a little overpowering, and after leaving my 2 heavy suitcases in my room, I made for the streets. I was aware of the past of the country. How often had I been told that, though in Germany there were many people who refused to vote for Hitler, in Austria the tyrant had been received by an almost unanimously adoring population. None of this was on my mind when I strolled to the Naschmarkt and inhaled the scents of herbs and vegetables, completely unknown to me. A blanket of voices speaking, or rather shouting in unfamiliar dialects and languages, spread in the air. It drifted over me, thick with wood and coleslaw. Chestnuts and sausages were being roasted by women, their heads bound with radiant scarves. When they looked at the songs painted on the houses designed by the architect Wagner, men with broad, shining faces winked at me. I told myself I had landed at a feast, close to where musicians Mozart, Schubert, and Mahler had lived and composed, close to where Freud had practiced his psychiatry, close to the cafes where artists and writers like Schiller, Schnitzler, and Kent. With many women had gathered for their nightly discussions. Feeling dizzy with the mix of cultural warfare, I went and sat in one of those Viennese cafes that served chocolate cakes and sausages with freshly grated horseradish. Little did it matter that everybody around me was from the stale and old, by the running in the city that used to have a great future. At the home for young ladies, I met the daughter of a train driver. She invited me to join her at her parents' house over the weekend. They lived near the Czech border. I had trouble understanding her parents' German and felt out of place eating the heavy food that they so kindly served. After dinner, the girl offered to walk me to the border to see the posts high up, where the soldiers stood watch with their rifles, to see where the barbed electric-hide wire cut through the wildflowers in the field. Nobody would leave that country, she said. Her father told stories of trade trips he had made, how he drove the train with the people who were allowed to leave Moscow to come to Vienna and then travel on. These were the Jewish people from Russia who, after many years of being prohibited from leaving the country, had finally been allowed travel visas to leave Russia and go to settle in Israel or, as is often the case, go straight to America. I should go, he said, early some morning to Südbahnhof to see those bunches of families arrive. I stayed the night and rushed back to Vienna the next day to move out of the home and join my friends in their new apartment. For a couple of months, music takes over. I share the apartment with 3 other people. We set off to explore the mountains close to Vienna. We dance around at half the street, where we sit down some evenings to sound-reamed vocal quartets. We get tipsy on young wine, Sturm. And one night, when we go to the theatre, I try to reproduce an image of myself as the Judith from Mr. Kind, Kind's famous painting. We are young and we laugh and discuss all sorts of topics. Never the wall down. It gets colder and snow starts to fall on Vienna. I skip through the snow to the tree that takes me to the suburbs where my teacher lives in her mansion. Struggling with my heavy boots and coat, I'm feeling a little sorry for my hat of the long walk from the station to her place for my hour-long coaching session. In her warm house, she laughs her ticket singer-gone at my frozen face and says, I should take the train from the Südbahnhof. It's a much shorter train ride to her suburb. I shake the snow off my clothes and shirts and suddenly remember that the train driver had mentioned the station. I felt as if a cold hand had gripped me by the throat at the idea of going to that station early in the morning. Now that it is mentioned again, it may be time to go have a look there, though. A composer-conductor, Leonard Bernstein, walks into my lesson to talk to my teacher. We shake hands, and I am distracted from thoughts about the Südbahnhof until my lesson is over, and I have to face the dark and the snow schlep again. Ignoring my student grudges, I asked the housekeeper to call me a taxi, all the way back to my apartment. Then I told my housemates that I plan to get up at 5 the next morning to see the enemy trains from Russia arrive. My singer friend is dismissive. Her brother wants to know wine, with wine to drink and a roaring stove. As if to smooth out the subject of our conversation a bit, we discussed the quite recent past of their country. My friend goes to bed. Her brother and I talk through the night, as if it is time for me to go to the Südbahnhof. At 7 in the morning, I'm looking up at the soot-covered roof of the Südbahnhof, feeling warm in my coat and chewing on a Hamburger, a freshly baked roll. I don't know exactly why I seem to have followed myself to this place. The building was constructed around 1840, and nothing much seems to have been done to it since. Even the crows that are picking at invisible bits of food on the cracked platform seem more ancient and blacker than any I have ever seen. There are hardly any trains coming in from or going out into the damp winter morning. Melted snow drifts on empty carriages. Porters rattle their carts in expectation of a load. This is an end station. It terminates. No train can rush through to make you dream. In the moment, it whooshes by of undiscovered destinations. Slowly the snow and dirt-covered train enters the station. Dusty windows, no faces or movement, noticeable inside the compartments. But when the doors hurriedly open, entire families burst onto the platform, where I stand waiting, and I suddenly feel a lightness in my head and a heartbeat in my stomach, as if I'm expecting to meet people I have not seen in a long time, people close to me. Nobody notices me. They're dressed in rough wool and hard shoes, pushing and pulling at their badly tied up luggage. Their small children have faces swollen from tiredness. They all move as fast as they can towards the buses that will bring them to the airport, to freedom in the United States or Israel. Did I think the ones I'd heard so much about would come back? Why this irrational feeling of excitement? And I know that most of those people would be dead by now anyway, even if they had survived. Or was I just hoping for a joyous crowd of travelers that maybe would greet me on their way to a better future? Not this grey mass of humans who look as if they've had day themselves out of prison and who are rushing with bitter determination towards the unknown. When the crows resume their picking, I wonder what is there. But to music.
Met de beste noot, maar niet gehoord. Is dat niet wel van hij nog een keer te zingen?
Well, name for the art. You, I'm bookstook.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, husband was the wired habitry, which is great. You were my father, Heinrich Mok. You changed your name from Moses to Heinrich because you thought that Heinrich sounded better. Less obvious alliteration, and more modern, maybe. You tried to explain it to me with that slight, nearly hesitant smile. You were once, long before World War II, a successful poet and autodidact. At 14, your father took you out of school, much to the distress of your schoolmaster, and you had to work in an office for diamond traders, writing letters, business correspondent, you would call it. It sounded over the face when you mentioned it. I could not imagine you being an office person. Your boss couldn't either.
That man
Must have had some wisdom in him when he wasn't weighing his precious tokens. He paid the leading professor to teach the young boy German, French, Spanish, and English, saying it would help him to write good letters for his business. Maurits got paid for a full-time job and only worked in the mornings. In the afternoon, he learned language back, or went to the libraries and read. The books he couldn't take home with him, he learned by heart. His parents never knew about these goings-on. After 4 or 5 years, the language lessons in the afternoon hours were replaced by Margaret spending their time waiting in the cafe. When his first works were published, his boss smiled, and then Margaret told him that he wanted to be a man of letters, he laughed and told him good luck, and so father settled in Amsterdam with his older sister, Sarah, who taught in a school and worked as a classical pianist. At that time, around 1935, a lot of German Jewish artists had come to seek refuge from the Nazi regime in Holland. My father's sister Sarah moved in with her lover, Leo Strauss from Berlin. Leo and his 2 young sons met my aunt Sarah at a concert where she performed music by Chopin. My father continued his life as a serious single man in literature. This meant, apart from reading and writing, sitting in cafes in the morning, afternoon or night, and taking part in discussions and parties while drinking Genever, Dutch gin. He had a brief fling with a German girl. She became pregnant and gave birth to a girl, my sister Elsa. My father officially adopted Elsa and raised her. He never married her mother. There must have been a great deal of flirting and passionate affairs going on in these terrible, chaotic times before the war. Uprooted artists with no money, and often with no place where they could work, flung themselves into the bohemian life of Amsterdam. The gentlemen Tuschinski and Kostopolski had their big hotels and theatres at the disposition of those looking for distraction in a perfect Art Deco setting. My father met the Jewish Austrian writer Joseph Koht, who was to become world famous years after his death. He was miserable, a heavy draper, and stranded in Amsterdam, penniless. His work and erudition fascinated the power, and Rossi became his mentor. "You are a poet who drinks coffee," Joseph Ross, the famous alcoholic, laughed at my father when he ordered coffee for breakfast during a meeting with him. I don't know how many times my father told me this story, even when I was a little girl. How Joseph Roth had large glasses of Burgundy for breakfast, while remaining perfectly sober. And my father got more and more wound down by the coffee and the excitement of discussing German literature and the very oppressive political developments in Germany. Roth had been writing a column in Berlin and was getting increasingly depressed by the rise of the Nazi Party. It is winter in New York. I kick at the hardened snow patches on my way to my favorite cafe, Sopranistin, where they have a Steyr-made grand piano and serve Yeti strudel. Beside the open fire, where I like to open my notebook on the wooden table and lean back in the cushions, savoring the timeless goings on. It is there where it is in New York, with my beloved shirts, just a telephone call away, that we are so often. I seem to recognize faces out of the street where I know why somebody would have lived, where I looked at the schools for my next rehearsal and looked up through the tall windows to watch the passers-by find their way through a maze of snowflakes. And then I dream of them coming in to say hi. It could be an annoying aunt with noisy children, and we could complain to each other about this or that, life. When I had my fill of cake, I go upstairs to the Neue Galerie Museum bookshop, see if they have any new books. There it is, a book called Joseph Moks, A Life in Letters. I open the book right there and see a picture of Joseph and my father, and some artist prints of theirs, sitting in the cafe in Amsterdam in 1937. That is how my father came to greet me that day in New York. Joseph Roth encouraged my father as a writer, and by the late 40s his name was well established enough for him to write a pamphlet addressed to the nation, warning people about the rise of anti-Semitism and the threat of a war with Germany, and to be taken seriously by a large number of readers. One day in Amsterdam, I receive a phone call from a close friend. I have bought a house, come and see it. I go, how wish is my command. We drive up a due. We go up a number of steps and she opens the door to the large old house. Her new house. I stand in the doorway. And as if driven by a dream, I go down the stairs. The door to a room is open, the room is empty. There's one large window filled with summer gleam, and one large cupboard built into a wall that turns out to be a safe. I feel warm and sheltered in the embrace of this room, but I'm not to close the safe, shut, to lock away what is a threat I feel. My friend comes in branching a booklet. There's a short history of the house, which, as it turns out, used to be owned by Heinrich-Böll Weekend, a formidable poet and communist from a wealthy background, who was the respected patron of the arts. She took my father under her wing when he was 19 and encouraged him in his work. Years later, at the end of the 1930s, he moved into this downstairs room, the one I'm standing in. I must have felt a remainder of his presence. I hove around the room, hoping for more, a shadow, a scratch of a pencil. Nothing. It moves me that my friends live here now, and that I will be able to stay with them in the room where my founder wrote his famous pamphlet about the rise of the Nazis and their plans for the extermination of the Jewish people.
Thank you.